Hi everyone, I'm back with another video for Diablo 4. This time I want to talk about my Necromancer. This is the first time I've played a Necromancer post the betas, and I have chosen Sever because that was really like my favorite skill for Necromancer that I wanted to try. And man, I'm having a blast with this. As you can see here, it actually turned out really powerful. And I want to do a bit of like a work in progress progression update here for my character, because I'm about to respec it to Bonestorm to try that build as well. And then I'm gonna probably have some end game viable setup at some point when I get back to this, and gonna try tier 100 with this. But I gotta say, so far I'm having an absolute blast with this Sever build, and as you can see here, it is melting through those even higher level monsters much easier than I had anticipated, and much more than I am used to from, for example, playing rogues. And this is basically with almost a non-seasonal setup. So I only had like this heart that auto-cast some of the corpse stuff, but I wasn't really relying on like the corpse skills that much. But it just gave me like a bit of resources and a bit of buffs and stuff like that. Usually I was playing this with just 3 skulls basically, and like a non-seasonal version to try it out and see how it feels for like an Eternal Realm version. And well, that was almost the same, I guess, in speed and power, I gotta say. The hearts didn't really feel like they were too crazy impactful. And the way that I optimized this entire build is that I just try to get like as much resource generation and resource cost reduction into the setup as possible, so that I can spam Sever whenever I want to, basically. So this is what I was working towards. And for example, I went with a Ring of the Umbro for the extra resource generation when I crowd control enemies. And there's a bunch of crowd controls in this build. We have the 2 curses, so there's the Decrepify that slows, then there's the Corpse Tendrils that also slows and stuns enemies and also knocks them back. So especially the Corpse Tendril has like a really big impact here. When you press it and there's a few enemies nearby, you instantly fill your resources. And like this, I can spam my Sever a few times and destroy everything. And then I just repeat that. And for the boss, I just try to like optimize my damage high enough to the point where I just like defeat the boss in like 1 or maybe 2 fills of my essence. So basically just like walk in and blast it down in like 5 attacks, or maybe sometimes it's not enough. I just like fill it up again and then do a second round, and this usually works. Later on, I also tried to play the setup with like a real Season 1 version, with the Barber, with the automatic aura, and with the automatic corpse skills. So the Necro hearts this season are actually pretty good, because you can change your setups a bit, and you can actually put in other skills, and you have like more auto-cast things. And you see here, for example, stuff is just getting automatically pulled together from the corpse tendrils, giving you all the buffs. So that is pretty powerful in some cases. And also it just deals with those bosses much easier, because for example here, I walk in, I produce 1 corpse, I get the corpse tendrils, I get my buffs, and then I just like blast down the boss and pop. That's it. So here's my default planner for this build so far, and this is a bit of a work in progress, as I mentioned, so I'm gonna probably expand this a little bit. But you can see it here. The good thing is that basically everything in this build is actually a codex power, so you can basically just make the entire setup from scratch. All you need is like a few of those hearts here, especially this auto corpse heart, and then if you want, you can also go with the auto aura heart, and then you can actually like remove one of the skills in the bar. So when you have like a 0 or 1 roll on this aura heart, you can actually get it in Blood Mist, for example, or Bonestorm. But I was playing without it, and my character actually felt very sturdy. It's a very tanky build for some reason. And I was actually totally fine even playing on hardcore without any crowd control breaks, without Blood Mist. I was just like blasting like this. And now, for example, I've also started experimenting with a lidless wall setup here, where I just like throw the Bonestorms around everywhere. I'm not really 100% sure how I feel about this. It is relatively powerful, especially for like higher tiers if you want to push, because you have some defensive synergies here with Shielding Storm. But outside of that, I feel it's a bit clunky, at least for this build. And I will see if I actually like experiment more with this. But it also works relatively well. So you can see this here, for example, when I was level 80, this was just like last night, I've been experimenting with this. And this is a tier 66, so it's like much higher than you ever would want to farm, basically, for leveling. And I just wanted to like imitate a bit of like a push run here, just to see like how it will feel later on in tier 100s. And well, it still kind of works already. At least while the Bonestorms are up, you have lots of damage reduction, you have the extra crit, and then the Shielding Storm just gives you like this insane barrier, and it basically fills up your entire barrier to maximum like all the time, as long as there's enemies. But on the other hand, you have to be quite aware of like the timers of your Bonestorms. They only last 10 seconds, and sometimes you run between packs and there's no enemies, or you loot items and it just might drop, and then you're there without Bonestorm. So you can see this lidless wall Bonestorm setup in action here. This is a tier 66 when I was level 80, so I tried this last night just to like imitate a bit of a push run here. Of course, it's like way higher tier than you ever would have to farm if you like just want to level up. But I wanted to see how this feels in like a T100 push basically, or getting somewhere in that direction at least, before I tried at actually level 100. And as you can see here, it actually goes pretty smooth, at least with the hearts and the little wall being active. One weakness I noticed is that it's quite easy to lose your Bonestorms basically. The way this works is that you have to have one active Bonestorm somewhere, and then whenever you hit something outside of the range of that Bonestorm, you spawn a new one, or you have a high chance to spawn one. But it also makes it so that you have to be very much aware of like when it was your last Bonestorm that you spawned. How long is it gonna last? Like, you have to be very fast with looting your items sometimes. There can be like 5 items on the ground, and that might take too long to loot, and then you lose the Bonestorm. So it also felt a bit clunky on that end, but it is a very powerful combo, at least for those slower, higher tier runs. You always have your barrier up, as you can see here. It just like fills your entire health bar with the barrier really quickly whenever you have Bonestorm, and this gives you lots of survivability. But on the other hand, you are quite weak whenever Bonestorm is down. So for example, in the boss fights, it's easily going to go down. And sometimes, as I mentioned, you might be running into a dead end, or you might be looting too much, or you might just not get a proc at all. And then your Bonestorm is on cooldown, and it feels quite bad. So I will see if I experiment more of this. But at very least, for like high tier pushing, it seems very useful for the survivability. I have the full skill tree here. I actually have a few slightly tweaked versions. So here's the season 1 with like the stuff I was running basically, with the double curse, double corpse. So this is only possible if you have the automatic corpse heart, because you don't want to cast corpse explosion yourself. This is only there to like just cast corpse skills while you're doing nothing basically, and this gives you Grim Harvest. This gives you Fuel by Death. If you play this on non-season or Internal Realm, then this corpse explosion is completely useless. You don't really want to cast this. So instead I put in Bonestorm here. So even without this wall, you can just use this as a cooldown, have more damage, you can nuke down the bosses, etc. Helps you out a little bit. Or if you don't want that, you can also go with Blood Mist there. And you also need to cast your 2 curses here. If you don't have the auto Decrepify heart, which is here, then you need to cast Decrepify yourself. So I always did like Decrepify, Iron Maiden, and then I just blast down the packs. And in the bigger pulls, I would do the Corpse Tendril, so that I get everything in there. And then everything is stunned, and you just like decimate them with like 1 or 2 hits. And this is also important for the damned affix, so this gives you up to 100% damage on a 2-handed weapon. In general, I really like 2-handed weapon for this setup here. I was running with 1-handed offhand for a while. We can roll some pretty nice stats there. There's cooldown, there's resource generation, etc. on an offhand, but I felt like the higher damage per hit and the better like resource economy basically with a 2-handed weapon was just stronger in my opinion, and also like a better roll, or like a higher roll of this damned affix here. Some people might be asking like, why not putting a blighted aspect in there, and why do I not have Shadow Blight? Well, it turns out Sever is a darkness skill, but most of the time I was just like one-shot packs, and on a one-shot Shadow Blight does nothing. It only works on the second hit. And also this 10 stacks and the blighted aspect have some issues. Most importantly, that they disappear whenever you loot an item. And I really like looting items. So most of the time I was just like stack it up very slowly, an item drops, I click on it and it disappears, so that's a bug. But this makes Shadow Blight and the blighted aspect pretty unusable for this. I did try it with the Grease of the Empty Tomb. So this is doable. It gives you like a much higher rate of stacking the Shadow Blight aspect. But I didn't really like it too much, to be honest. I just went for like more speed. So we can get movement speed on elite kill, we can get movement speed on crit with Windstriker, for example, or just any utility aspect you want. And I think that normal boots just are better than those boots. But maybe for like higher tiers, when you try to push and runs are much slower and you don't really care about loot, then I would probably go with these here, and you can go with blighted aspect and have more damage output. So at least for like the really high end, that is definitely an option. But yeah, that makes it so that I just went with Rathma's Vigor, 10% extra life, that's always nice. So I don't really have like many good defensive aspects in this build that really do something. I have Might, which I even don't activate very much. Then there's Audacity, that's not even a defensive one. And then we have Disobedience. So this is like the extent of my defense here. And the rest just comes from like the skill tree basically, and the item rolls here, like chest and pants with like damage reduction rolls, quite important. But outside of that, there's not really that much good stuff to stack in terms of defense. And well, the 10% extra life does help here. So this is the main reason. But if they ever fix the blighted aspect, like dropping, then I think it would be a good idea to go back to Shadow Blight, at least, as I said, for high tiers, for like difficult content. That definitely seems to be the way then. But the cool part is I'm just tanky, and also I don't need to like look at my buff bar and see like when is the blighted proc coming up. I just play the game and I have like consistent damage output. I don't have like this big burst and then I have nothing. So I just went with other powers here. So we have Sacrificial, we have the Grasping Veins, of course. I've put in an Edge Masters, because why not? We have the Umbral that I mentioned and the Dance. So these are the offensive powers here, and they basically make that build. And the rest of the skill tree is pretty straightforward. We have the Darkness stuff, we have the curses here, 1 point each, a bunch of the corpse things. And then up here we have the Reap, we have the Sever that makes everything vulnerable. So that is really nice. And a bunch of the other passives here that just gives extra damage here. Amplify damage, Death's Embrace, Fueled by Death. I also have Inspiring Leader. You don't need to actually have minions for that. So you just get a bunch of extra damage. And then the sacrifice things. We have everything sacrificed here. I have the 15% extra shadow damage. I have the 15% damage to vulnerable. And I have the 30% crit damage from the sacrifices. So no minions. I didn't really want to play with this with minions. I think you could play this with minions, especially the cold mages, to give you resources. Could be interesting here, but you would have to drop 1 skill from the bar. So I guess, at least for like a non-seasonal setup, probably that Bonestorm, I would replace that with the skeleton, and then you can like have your mages up there, and maybe even some other skellies or so that do something, and you would get resources there all the time, at least on bosses. Bosses is definitely like the one big weakness of this build, where you can't really generate resources very easily. You only have the Reap that gives you 4 essence per hit, and that is basically nothing. So you need to try to like have enough damage basically to just destroy the boss in like 1 go, or maybe in 2 goes. And as for the Paragon setup, just real quick, we have 6 boards here, 6 glyphs, and 2 legendary nodes that are important. So one is the Scent of Death. So this is quite nice. You walk up to the boss, you reap it once, there's 1 corpse, then the corpse will be consumed with the corpse tendrils, and voila, you have 50% increased damage, and you have your corpse tendril buff with the Grasping Veins buff. The boss is vulnerable and they destroy him. So you don't want to like spam your reap too much if you don't have to for the resources. So you're just going to do exactly 1 swipe, and then you have the 0 corpses after the corpse tendrils are gone. And we also have the Flesh Eater here. So at the very least on seasonal, where you have like constantly those corpse explosions going off and stuff like that from the heart, this might be like a really nice buff here. So at least most of the time I just walk around and I have this buff, and 40% extra damage is no joke here. But outside of that, all of the boards are pretty useless, and most of the rare nodes are also not really great. It's like very specialized towards certain like abilities or ability like categories basically on the Necromancer boards. So here's like only bone stuff, for example. It's not really useful. Here's fortified stuff. I mostly just went for glyphs at that point. So we have the Sacrificial, you get extra damage for not having minions. Then we have the Exploit glyph, that's the vulnerable glyph. We have Amplify, that gives you extra effects for curses. We have Essence, that's the crit damage glyph. We have Control, this is the crowd control glyph. And we have Territorial, this is the close damage glyph. So I just went for this combo here, try to optimize them as much as possible. And this is what I'm going for right now. And that's it for my Sever build update for now. So I'm gonna optimize this further. I'm gonna try to do T100s of this. I don't think it's gonna be a huge problem. And as always, I'm also gonna try to like learn about the Eternal Realm viability of this. So I'm probably gonna do like a T100 without any hearts and stuff like that as well. So stay tuned for that, but it will be probably like another week or so, because now I'm about to respec this, and I'm gonna play some Bone Spear. I'm gonna see that first, and then we're gonna go back to Sever at some point. And I definitely wanna try Uber Lilith with Sever as well, so that's gonna be quite interesting. Let's see if that works out. For now, hope you liked this one. And as I mentioned, work in progress, so the planner is probably going to get updated over time. And stay tuned for another round of an update for this build. That's it. Hope you liked this video, and see you guys next time.